Hello, everyone, and welcome to SlasherU, a college football podcast by Slasher Sports. I'm your host, Christian Rao, here with my co-host, Steve Feck. Steve, welcome back. I missed you yesterday, and we got a Wildcard Wednesday on our hands. It's going to be a great episode. How's it going?
I'm doing fine. Well, again, being retired and on Social Security, I can only do so many podcasts. Okay. Otherwise, they start reducing my benefits. So I have to be careful. I don't want to overindulge in college football. Now, college basketball, you're going to have to keep me off the air, I think. But college football, I think it's good for you to take the lead every once in a while.
All right. I like that. I'm wondering how long you held on to that one before you finally said it to me about that joke. I like that. And speaking of, Steve put the cat out of the bag a little bit. College basketball is coming to SlasherU. I'm excited for it. I know Steve is too, as you can tell. We will have our first episode come live to you. Well, it won't be live. We will be live during the season, but we'll give you a weekly preview starting next week. So be ready for in the podcast feed and YouTube page for that. We'll start having some college basketball content. And just like we're giving you so much college football content throughout the week, once the season kicks off in basketball land, you're going to get the same. You get to see more of our gorgeous faces and beautiful sounds on the microphone, not only for college football, for college basketball. We're really giving you all the great content that SlasherU. We're glad that you are enjoying it so far. Thank you for all the support. We are really seeing some great engagement as we just start kicking off this project. It's really encouraging, and it's making it a lot of fun.
Yeah, a special shout out to all those Mel Tucker fans out there.
Yeah, or Mel Turner, right? Mel Turner.
Turner, yes. But yeah, malapropisms are okay. But yeah, I mean, I didn't realize that Michigan State fans were that passionate about their head coach.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're rocking the Michigan State green in the background right now, so maybe they thought that it was a supportive podcast. Well, in this case, it wasn't the case. It wasn't the case in that clip. If you're wondering what we were talking about, head over to our YouTube page. You'll see our topic on how we believe that Mel Tucker is maybe a mistake for Michigan State. But that's not what we're here to talk about today, although that thought is a wild card. And we're not talking about the baseball wild card, even though, Steve, your Blue Jays did make the wild card. So congratulations on that one.
Thank you. Thank you.
But we're here to talk about Wild Card Wednesday today with a few wild card topics of college football, some that we just didn't get to at the beginning of the week and some we might not get to once we start getting previews at the end of the week towards week 6. We want to make sure we still talk about these topics because these are some great ones to still discuss. And the first one we're going to discuss is out of the ACC Coastal, and that's North Carolina versus Miami. North Carolina, we've seen some dreadful defense from this team, but we've seen some of the best quarterback play in the country. It is like the flip side of, it's like taking Iowa, like we talked about last week, but flipping it upside down.
True.
And then you see Miami, who is on a bye week, but they have had some issues. I think that's probably to say it lightly, Steve. They lost to Texas A&M in a close matchup, and then they got blown out by Middle Tennessee. Paid them $1.5 million to only have 1.6 yards per play. I can't get over that stat, and I think they made it a joke, and I think that's why I can't get over it. But the reason I want to talk about this battle, this big game here, is because the ACC Coastal is really wide open. Now, I'm not a big fan of divisions inside conferences. I'm glad that the Pac-12 got rid of it. I'm hoping that they do it with the ACC and Big Ten moving forward because I think the best two teams in the conference should play against each other. That's just my viewpoint. But regardless, we're not there yet. And the ACC Coastal has some tough teams in the Coastal with some question marks as well. We just saw what happened to Pitt last week against Georgia Tech. We thought they might be the ones that run through the Coastal this year. Doesn't look that's the case. UNC versus Miami. This could be the battle for the best team in the ACC Coastal. What do you think?
Oh, no, I agree. Pitt has been way too inconsistent on the offensive side of the ball. I mean, you have a vision, many of you, of Pitt really dictating the tone of the game against WVU in the backyard brawl. I mean, a great college football game to start the season, but they are just not very consistent. Fans, I think, are getting a little anxious about some of the play calling. They think maybe perhaps they're not aggressive enough. Now, Duke right now is technically atop the Coastal. Duke is just coming off its first conference win in 13 games. They lost 13 straight ACC games. They're just coming off of that. I don't think that Duke is going to be a player come November. But certainly you can see, glimmers of light there. So maybe we need to start focusing on Duke as we get toward the end of the year, seeing, well, gee, what are they going to be able to do next year? But this year, I think it's going to boil down to North Carolina and Miami. And like you alluded to, North Carolina's given up more than 400 yards, 450 yards per game, 450.8 to be exact. Ooh. Yards per game. Miami's putting up 447.5. So when you look at that, you're like, oh my God, it's a lopsided match. But North Carolina's been able to put up some points too. Basically, even in a loss, they scored 61 points.
Yeah, that is something to keep in mind, is that they can still score points. And you look at the spread early here, and this might be something you want to get to early if you are a betting, if you are one of those degens in the betting world. The over-under is 66, and I feel like that is almost a given to slam the over on that one.
Oh, yeah. I don't get that.
Yeah.
I mean, are they is there weather systems that we haven't seen yet that perhaps?
No, it's expected to be 86 and sunny for a nice 4:00 game on Saturday. So I'm not sure why that. Miami is favored to win this football game. They're a 4-point favorite, and I think that really directs towards just how bad that North Carolina defense is. We saw it on display against Notre Dame, and Notre Dame just tore apart North Carolina's defense. And this is a Notre Dame team that is not the greatest this year. We saw at the beginning of the year. We knew that, this was going to be, it looks like it's going to be a rebuilding team for Marcus Freeman. North Carolina has a fantastic quarterback. May is one of the best quarterbacks in all of the land, in my opinion. He's almost thrown 1,600 yards already, 19 touchdowns, 1 interception. He's really putting up the stats. On the other side, even though they're putting up a lot of points, there seems to be possibly, I don't even know if you want to say possibly, I think there is a quarterback controversy with the Hurricanes. Van Dyke was slated to be the starter in this game. Mario Cristobal went out and said that he will start. However, I believe he's going to be on a very short leash, Steve.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, it's a matter of making mistakes, and we're not talking just turnovers, but making questionable decisions as far as forcing the ball places that perhaps they shouldn't, maybe throwing the ball when there might be some open yardage where they can tuck it and at least gain something, or at least get back to the line of scrimmage. So it'll be interesting there. The Miami program's another one where I think fans overreact way too quickly. They still think this is the 80s version of the Miami Hurricanes. The totally different brand of football, that those days are gone. Miami's made a nice rebound here, but I think Cristobal really is coming out and saying nobody's job is safe. I don't care who you are. Well, as long as I am coach here, you've got to perform week in, week out, or you're going to be on the bench. So I don't know that it's necessarily a thing of an overreaction to the Middle Tennessee game. I think it's, look, I'm not kidding. You think I'm just playing around at practice? This is a different culture now. You have to come in. You got to play every day. You can't make mistakes. And if you make mistakes or you're not willing to play hard every down, you're going to be on the bench.
I am a really big fan of Carolina's quarterback. Huge fan. I think he can really make some big plays, but I just don't know if that's enough to take UNC in this football game, because how dreadful their defense is. Miami had some tough times against Middle Tennessee and did not do a good job offensively against Texas A&M. That was a low-scoring game. However, I think their bye week the bye week came at a perfect time for the Hurricanes. I believe that their issues were easily more adjustable than what's going on with the Tar Heels. I think the Tar Heels just have a bad defense that is not going away this year. I think that's just a flaw of their roster right now. On the other hand, Miami, I think, just needs some adjustments. And I think that's why I'm going to take the Hurricanes in this football game, because I think that the adjustments were made during the bye week. We might still see some flaws. Don't get me wrong. I don't think it's been perfected by Cristobal, but he is a good coach. I think he knows that he can, take care of the job in the bye week and get them ready for the Tar Heels. I'm going to take the Hurricanes with the -4 here and the over. That's where I'm going to slam. I'm not too confident on it. Don't get me wrong, because I think both these teams are pretty close when it comes to competition level, but I just can't trust that Tar Heel defense.
Well, no, I understand. I think we're going to have another barn burner. It would not surprise me if they beat the over by halftime. Honest to God, in this game, it would not surprise me whatsoever, since weather's not going to be a factor. I'm going to take the Tar Heels just for the sake of devil's advocate here. I agree. Giving Cristobal the bye week, I think he's going to have fixed, or at least had a game plan to fix what the ills have been against, Middle Tennessee and some of their other struggles here. I think it's going to come down to a big play late. And again, it's going to be quarterback play. And I'm going to go with North Carolina in this one, taking the points. But I still think that they're going to definitely cover as far as getting the points. But I think I'm going to pick them to win on this game.
I think if I'm going to put them in a parlay or actually play them, I think I might leave the spreads alone and just play the over. I think I might, because I feel like that's the safer bet in this entire game, is just play the over, because it's going to be a high scoring football game. Speaking of Duke, just like you talked about earlier, because they are technically in the lead in the ACC Coastal right now. I'm with you. I think Duke has the opportunity to win this division. They obviously have to play both Miami and North Carolina later this week, or later this season, I believe in 2 weeks and 3 weeks from now, respectfully. But I'm just not so sure, just like you said, that they can continue this pace. Now, they did hold up well. Their only loss against Kansas, who is now ranked by only a touchdown, 8 points. But their other wins, Virginia was a great win, sure. But like you said, that was the first ACC win they've had in a very long time. Let's see what happens this week when Duke faces Georgia Tech, who we thought might be a easy win after the firing of Jeff Collins. Well, last week, Georgia Tech took care of Pitt. So can Georgia Tech be on this gauntlet run and now take care of Duke? Or does Duke finally settle them out? So that's hey, you never know. You never know. This is why I think that's so crazy with these divisions, how there's an opportunity. I mean, just think about this right now, Steve. If Georgia Tech goes in and beats Duke, Georgia Tech will be in the lead of the ACC Coastal after this week. Put that in perspective. That's how crazy these divisions are. Obviously, conference wins are huge, but something like that really puts things in the perspective of why I think that they should get rid of divisions inside of conferences. All right, let's move on and talk about the FCS, as we always do every Wednesday, a true wild card, Steve. And again, first top 2 teams out of the Missouri Valley, and both of them have losses. I talk about it over and over again. Montana won again, but they're still sitting at number 3. Number 1 goes to the North Dakota State Bisons, and South Dakota State Jackrabbits at number 2. We talked about it on Friday or Saturday. I can't remember which one, but we talked about the North Dakota State versus Youngstown State game. North Dakota State wins 27-14 in that one. They remained the number 1 team in the country. Pretty good game, though, for sure.
I think it's different in the FCS than it is in the FBS. I'm a big believer. Hey, the FBS, I'm always screaming, if you're undefeated, you need to be above any team with a loss. In the FCS, quite often, either you're playing FBS teams in the first couple of weeks, so you can expect a loss, or over time, the cream rises to the top. So you watch, let's say, a North Dakota State who really eliminated any offensive game from Youngstown State. Youngstown State not ranked at the moment, but they're a traditional FCS power. You look at that, and you look at just overall the depth of that team. They had some pretty key injuries at key positions, and they did miss a beat, and they put up some late scores. So I think North Dakota State, it's going to be a matter of, Montana's going to have to beat them.
That's fair. And that makes perfect sense, because we've seen in the past how great that Bison's team is. And I know that you shouldn't put rankings based on past performances, especially in years past, especially in college football. But in this case, I feel like there is a little bit of bias in there, but they are proving that they deserve to be at the top spot. That loss is against an FBS school, understandable. Got you. One of the games that I'm interested in, I know you're going to want to talk about Missouri Valley and Big Sky, because those are the conferences that really deserve the credit. But I was talking to you earlier today when I was looking through the new top 25, and the one that really caught my eye was William and Mary against Delaware. And I think that game is going to be very entertaining. And the Colonials, no joke this year.
No, I don't think it's really a joke any year. As far as the balance, I think throughout that conference, I think it's always a very well-balanced conference. Every conference always has that team that's having the bad year. But really, you have two come up and then you have two fall down to the bottom. Delaware is always good. William and Mary, I think, has done a nice job with their program. I would be shocked if one of the teams, if not both of those teams, don't make the FCS playoffs. That's how highly I think of them. If everything has to fall right in some of the other conferences.
Mm-hmm.
But they're well coached. They're very disciplined teams, both. And that's something you see in the Colonial. There are some FCS conferences where it's more wide open and maybe it's more haphazard kind of play. Teams in the Colonial know, okay, let's just play a disciplined game. Let's not turn the ball over. If we do that, we're going to have a chance to win any game, even the teams in the lower tier. So it'll be interesting. I mean, I like Delaware a lot in this game, but that's not dismissing William and Mary by any stretch. I mean, I've really been impressed with what they have done this year so far.
Yeah, Delaware's already 3-0 in the Colonial with their 5-0 record. Again, another undefeated team, only ranked 6th in the nation. I think if they can defeat William and Mary, who's ranked 17th, we're talking 2 top 25 teams going at it in the FCS. Delaware deserves to get moved up a little bit. Definitely some thought to keep in mind on that one. I do really like what Delaware has done as well. But of course, my bias here, can't count out the Tribe, little William and Mary love from only living about an hour south of the Tribe. All right, what else you got with the Missouri Valley and the Big Sky? Because I know you're dying to talk about it.
Well, I think that's where all eyes need to be. We're talking about Delaware and or William and Mary perhaps getting into the playoffs, but really the better teams are all in the Missouri Valley and the Big Sky. I did not look as closely at the schedules there. I was actually focused on the teams in the Eastern conferences this week as I was looking ahead to our Friday and Saturday shows, coming up with the Misfit game, which we'll unveil on Saturday. So I haven't looked at the schedules in depth, but I don't see any stumbling blocks for any of the Missouri Valley and Big Sky teams that are in the top 10 now. And basically they pretty much dominate, the FCS top 10. It'll be interesting to see which of those teams stumble first, because once they do, they're out of the national title consideration, really. So it'll be interesting. I think Montana is going to try to do things to put themselves more seriously in the conversation. Mm-hmm. You and I really like Montana, but I think they have to have a true statement game. I don't want to say it a run up the score kind of a game, but they have to have that kind of a win to get themselves. And what I find so interesting is that North Dakota State, obviously number one, gets the most first place votes. South Dakota State is not getting first place votes. Now, they may have in this poll. I didn't look at it that closely, but I know the week before they hadn't gotten any first place votes, and all the other first place votes are going to Montana. So
yeah, I noticed that too. And I thought that was interesting, but they still sat at number 3, which I thought was interesting.
So are the voters dropping them further down on their ballots? The non-Western Conference ones, the Eastern Conference coaches, are they just going, as you said, based on past performance, because they're not really having to play them, they're not really looking at film or anything? Are they just kind of overlooking Montana and just focusing on because North Dakota State, South Dakota State, they really are the crown princes, I think, of the FCS, at least over the last couple of years. I mean, I'm an Ivy League guy, but none of the teams in the Ivy match up with any of the teams really in either of those two conferences. So I don't understand polls. That's why I don't really like polls. It's one of the few times I wish there could just be a straight formula, where you rank them. Basically, it's 1 through 25, and where you are in certain categories, that gets you points. I don't know what the answer to that is. It's not like these writers in other markets and other conferences don't have access to the games anymore. Before, even 5 years ago, that was very much the case. But I mean, and you and I could have probably watched every significant FCS game on Saturday.
Certainly. Sounds like something maybe Slasher you might want to look into a Slasher U poll, if you will, based on some analytical stats. I think that might be something you and I might have to do on the side here. Maybe we'll have a chat after this podcast. Montana did have a 28-20 win at Idaho State last week. They are in a bye, and then they go face Idaho, which was an FBS team at one time. They made the drop to FCS. Could be an interesting game. That could be a game, like you said, that maybe Montana tries to do something big and gets hurt for it. So I'm interested to see what happens on that one. But right now they are leading the Big Sky. All right, let's dig into our next topic here. And we're going to head back in the FBS. We're going to head into the SEC. What a transition to that. Moving to the FCS, to arguably the best conference in all of college football. And we're going to talk about another division inside a conference, and that's the SEC West. We have Alabama leading the top. They're the number one team in the country right now after the new AP Top 25 poll came out. Whether you agree or disagree, that's the case. That's where it sits. Georgia moves down. Ohio State never got the chance to move up. Regardless, that's where Alabama sits. Alabama is not where I want to talk to you about, though, today, Steve. I want to ask you the question on who you think is the second best team in the SEC West. I think that deserves to have a conversation. I think that there are a few teams that really could strike to be that number 2 team. I mean, this is a conversation that's going to be a strong candidate for one of the NY6 Bowls. So I think this is something that deserves to be discussed. When you look at some of the people that are in there, you have, Ole Miss, who just came off a pretty good win against Kentucky. Mississippi State, we saw look good. LSU's on the grind up with Brian Kelly finally figuring out his team. Arkansas did come off a tough loss against Alabama, but, I mean, do you put them in the conversation? Texas A&M, we saw ranked at the beginning of the year, but Jimbo Fisher has done a great job of getting them out of the top 25. And then I would say the only one that shouldn't be in this conversation is Auburn. And that's just because they're just having a rough time with Brian Harsin. We know we've talked about Brian Harsin, I think, too much in the last few weeks. So that's as far as I'll go with that one in this conversation. So I'm going to turn it over to you before I give you my thoughts. But who would you give the number 2 spot in the SEC West?
Well, I'm going to do sort of a process of elimination first.
Okay.
So, I love Arkansas's defense, and I think they are the best. And again, it's not statistically, but they are the best defense in the country. Stick a fork in them; they're done as far as SEC contending for a division title. Texas A&M, they're overdone. They were on the grill too long. They're really done,
man. So, and Texas A&M has to play Alabama this week too,
right? So. And Paul Feinbaum on his show and also on ESPN came out again to bury another SEC coach, saying, well, yeah, there's a $95 million buyout if you get rid of Jimbo Fisher. But nobody around College Station seems too upset about that. They think they'll find the money somehow just to get him out. So that, if you're talking being willing to swallow $95 million just to get rid of a guy, there has to be some things, and it wouldn't be shocking to anyone that there's things behind the scenes and in the culture with Jimbo Fisher. So, but those guys are done. I still want to wait and see on Mississippi State. I thought they played well last week. I think outperforming what I thought they may do, but I still want to see another really strong performance. I mean, I'm sure they'll have some wins, but I want to see another really strong performance. So that leaves us Ole Miss and LSU. LSU technically is tied at the top with Alabama, and Brian Kelly is going to keep LSU in the conversation the whole year. We've said it multiple times throughout the season so far. I think it's going to be year 2 for Brian Kelly as far as really being a serious contender to Alabama. So I'm going to go with Ole Miss. Ole Miss impressed the hell out of me against Kentucky. I mean, their defense is much better than I perceived it to be just by reading. I hadn't seen an entire Ole Miss game until the Kentucky game. It'll be interesting if Ole Miss can stay in it. I mean, for me, the Lane Kiffin factor plays into the thing. He's going to do something stupid to cost Ole Miss a legitimate chance and upend it, even if Alabama would lose to someone else. I think that Lane Kiffin just finds a way to lose football games when he really can't afford to do it. So that's why I think they would not win the West, but I think they're going to be the solid, definitive runner-up to Alabama.
Yeah, you know what? When you look at that process elimination, I agree with almost everything you said until you got to the very end. And when you got to Ole Miss and LSU, my head started spinning. The wheel started turning a little bit. I really like what Ole Miss did as well against Kentucky. I truly think Kentucky lost the football game for themselves, though. I think Kentucky should have won that football game. Obviously, you can't change the past, but Kentucky gave 3 turnovers in their last 3 possessions. Will Levis had some issues. I think Kentucky should have won that football game. Doesn't change the fact how I think Ole Miss is still a good football team, but that's in my thought process. LSU, and I've said this a few times in the last few weeks, they are a blocked kick away from being an undefeated football team. They are that close. And then we started seeing, if anything, I think that loss was the best thing that could happen to this team because it gave the gut check about Brian Kelly right away in LSU. Something that was bound to happen eventually at some point in his coaching career down there because we've seen it happen with all the top coaches in LSU. It happened right away. So now he doesn't have to worry about that in the season. He can just focus on getting his team back to where they need to be. And they have grinded and they have done exactly that week in and week out. They looked great against Auburn in the second half. They saw some first half woes against Auburn and then they took off. This is the test for me this week. We're going to talk about this game coming up this weekend by far. Tennessee against LSU. If LSU can show me something against Tennessee and win that football game, I don't think there is another team on their schedule, and Ole Miss is one of them included, that will be LSU for that second spot in the SEC. I think LSU has the opportunity, but for now, until I can see that game proved by LSU, I'll agree with you. I say Ole Miss is the second best team in the Southeastern Conference West. How about that one?
And again, when you have a conference like the SEC, I mean, we're nitpicking. These are all the teams we talked about, except for Texas A&M, could probably be leading a division or leading a conference anywhere else in the FBS. Arkansas also ran in the SEC West, let alone the SEC as a whole. What would they do in the ACC? What would they do in the Big 12? I mean, I think we're having a different conversation about these football teams, but because they're in the SEC, I mean, hats off to them. They play the schedule. They don't complain. Well, Lane Kiffin complains, but again, that's a different show, different conversation. Yeah. But they just play. I mean, you don't even hear like Vanderbilt complain.
I think Vanderbilt's just happy to be there.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So it's, I mean, they benefit, in baseball and basketball and a lot of the women's programs. So okay, fine. People are still going to come out and hang out, at a Vanderbilt football game at least for a while. Then they'll go off and get their dinner reservations or whatever. But you don't hear any complaining within the SEC about how hard it is or how tough it is and it's unfair. They just go out and play football. And that's what I think makes the SEC special, as much as it pains me to have to say that, because I'm always looking for ways to denigrate the SEC, and you just can't. You simply cannot. They play the best brand of football, especially in conference, of anywhere in the country.
I'm with you. I agree completely. And there's a lot of money in that SEC to continue and keep that good football rolling for many years to come. And I'm sure it's only going to get better once we see teams like Texas and Oklahoma join the show as well. Speaking of a team that people love to discredit and not get on board with, let's talk about Michigan. Let's move up to the Big Ten. Let's talk about the Michigan Wolverines. A lot of doubt at the beginning of the year. If last year was a fluke season for the Wolverines making into the college football playoffs, obviously once they got there, they didn't stand a chance. You head into this year, you think Cade McNamara is going to be your quarterback. J.J. McCarthy hops in and becomes a very serviceable quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
He has become a solid positional player at that spot and has taken Michigan to not only head into Iowa City and win against a top 5 killer in the Hawkeyes, but win impressively. actually put on quite a show last week against Iowa. What I want to know, Steve, does Michigan have what it takes to win the Big Ten and appear in the college football playoffs? I didn't talk about Ohio State yet because we know how Ohio State is a monster of a football team this year. I would say it's probably the best offense in the country. And I think that it's hard to even have a debate on that discussion right there. I think Ohio State really has a top-notch offense. Michigan against Ohio State, we'll see it soon. Do they have the opportunity to defeat and take over the Big Ten once again?
I don't think they have a choice. I mean, they have to beat Ohio State. There's not going to be two teams from the Big Ten in the FBS playoff. Do they have the talent? Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the greatest thing watching McCarthy is that he's a game manager. You know, he's a very talented quarterback, but he manages the drives, you know, and he himself seems to be able to make, even though I know most of the plays are coming from the sidelines, he seems to be able to react once a play starts going into motion and say, okay, look, they're not giving us this. Can I find another receiver? Should I dump it out to a safety valve, to a quorum, or whoever it's going to be? He seems to be a good decision maker. He knows when to tuck the ball and run it. He knows when to throw it away. So that's huge. I mean, that's going to have to be there when they do play Ohio State. I think a lot of the poo-pooing of Michigan boils down to the coach again. Just like, you know, I was making fun of Lane Kiffin, which is an easy, cheap shot, really, making fun of Lane Kiffin. But there are a lot of people that just don't like Jim Harbaugh. I'm one of them. You know, so when Michigan is good, I love the players, but it's like, but Jim Harbaugh's going to find a way to take the credit for this. I mean, I'm sure. So I'm waiting for him to say, well, Blake Corum has blossomed in my system, and I know how to. That's going to come eventually. So I think that's the problem with Michigan. They're hard to root for. You could say that about Nick Saban. You know, with Alabama, nobody wants to root for Alabama. And when Urban Myers was at Ohio State, you definitely didn't want to root for Ohio State. Michigan, the program, the recruits, kids still want to come to Michigan. Even when they're in a down cycle, they want to play at Michigan because you're going to have those big crowds, and you're going to be on TV all the time, not just a Big Ten market. You're going to be on national TV. You're going to probably go to a bowl, even if you're not as deserving as others. But it boils down to Michigan or Ohio State. Both of those teams, they have to win that game, because if they don't, they're not going to be in the playoff. They'll be in a New Year's Bowl, but they're not going to be in the national title conversation anymore once they lose that game.
And that's a Week 12 football game. That's basically the Big Ten championship. If the Big Ten didn't have conference or divisions inside conferences, we might be seeing the same game 2 weeks in a row, if that was the case right now, because this is the top two teams in the Big Ten. So this is really, in my mind, who wins that game will head off and play a team in the Big Ten West who probably doesn't stand a chance against either of them. My thought process here, first of all, quick little shotgun question, is do you think Week 12, Michigan at Ohio State, is that a battle of two undefeated teams?
My head says yes. Logic dictates it's going to be two undefeateds.
Yeah.
Can I see what either Ohio State or Michigan lose a game that nobody anticipates that they're going to lose? I can see it, but I really, with any confidence, I can't pick a Big Ten team to say these guys are going to upset either Ohio State or Michigan.
Yeah,
I really don't.
Both the teams' only big other competitor left on their schedule is Penn State. And we saw Penn State really didn't look well last week. Now, Michigan does play Michigan State. And even though Michigan State is still down, they've had their number in the past, right? However, Iowa's had Michigan's number in the past, and Michigan took care of Iowa. Then you look at Ohio State, they also have Maryland on the schedule. We've seen Maryland on some up and up at one time, and they still also have to play Iowa, but they do play in Ohio State on that game. When I look at Michigan, I think, by the way, I agree with you. I think this is a battle of undefeateds. I think they take care of I think they take care of Michigan, or I'm sorry, I think they take care of Penn State. They do also play Illinois in week 11. I think Illinois is a really good football team, but I think that's one of the losses that Illinois takes. Watch out for Illinois in the Big Ten West, by the way. Let me put that out there. I think they have a really strong opportunity. People talk about Minnesota, talk about Purdue. Don't sleep on Illinois. Not only did Kansas break their drought for the top 25, I think Illinois is going to do that sometime this year as well. But okay, Michigan. Let's get back to that conversation. We think that in week 12, we're going to see a battle of undefeateds to take on and make it to the college football playoffs. Basically, that's what's going to be at stake in that football game. We see a fantastic quarterback on Ohio State's side in that offense. What about on Michigan's side? Can J.J. McCarthy, we've seen him be serviceable against teams like Iowa. We saw him against Maryland. Maryland was a little bit of a scare. What does that look like in a matchup against a huge team like Ohio State?
I have more confidence in Michigan's defense than I do in Ohio State's defense. So if Michigan can control the ball and they have the ideal combo in McCarthy and Korn, I think Michigan's defense can make some big plays, make some big stops. And now suddenly it's not necessarily a mismatch. I think a lot of people would come out and tell you, well, Ohio State and Michigan, as good as Michigan is, would be a mismatch. I mean, Ohio State can run up and down the field. They're so athletic. I think Michigan's defense would probably be the deciding factor in a Michigan win over Ohio State.
All right. You know what? I don't disagree with that one whatsoever. I'm excited for that game, and it's still 6 weeks away. November 26th. That's going to be, what's that, the Saturday after Thanksgiving? Mm-hmm. That's going to be very interesting. I'm looking forward to that football game. And then we get Army-Navy, very soon after that too, which I'm excited for Army-Navy as well. Michigan is a 22-point favorite in the matchup coming this Saturday against Indiana. Then they go and host Penn State and probably their toughest remaining game, with the exception of Ohio State at the end of the year. Speaking of Army-Navy game that we're going to see at the end of the year as well, let's shift over and let's talk about the Commander-in-Chief series. We saw Navy against Air Force last week, and Air Force took the win 13-10. We've also seen an Army team who was supposed to be pretty decent this year, Steve, and that is not the case. We had a lot of high hopes for Army. We talked about at the beginning of the year. We have some NFL prospects on that football team and Andre Carter. With the fact that Air Force defeats Navy, has the Commander-in-Chief trophy already been decided, since we already are seeing Army have a bad year?
I think it has. Now, again, Army, I believe, is a better football team than Navy. And certainly defensively, Carter is going to be a first-round pick. I think that's pretty much becoming a consensus. We don't know where, but, Army, tough defense. But I think Air Force, I was shocked they didn't put up as many points against Navy. And that's a credit to Navy's game plan. But I really think that Air Force is the premier service academy team in 2022. So I think it really is just a matter of playing for pride. So, and for Air Force, when you talk about academies and football games, it's Army Navy.
Right.
No matter how good Army is or how good Air Force is, it doesn't matter. It's Army Navy. That's the game that everybody talks about. And it's unfortunate because, last time I checked, the Air Force is a legitimate service academy. Maybe that changed in the Trump years. I don't know. I didn't follow that aspect of it. But they're on the same level as Army and Navy, but traditionally, because Air Force is out in Colorado, and that might as well be Japan or the Philippines to many people in the U.S., especially on the East Coast, Army Navy gets all of the attention. So it'll still be an exciting, electric game, but I think it's going to be decided already. Air Force is going to get the Commander-in-Chief trophy this year, and it looks like, just based on their recruiting classes, they had a little bit of a slap on the wrist for some recruiting issues during the COVID year, but I think Air Force might be the Commander-in-Chief trophy holder for the next 2-3 seasons, actually.
Yeah, I'm not against that, or I don't disagree with that at all. I think Air Force is not only the better service academy football team this season, they're also a team I think that can battle for the Mountain West. I think they really have an opportunity to do that as well. Now, obviously, Army doesn't have that opportunity to do that as they're independent, and Navy has no way in being any conference talks right now. They're really having a hard time. With that being said, Air Force plays Army on November 5th. I think that could be a really good matchup. Could Army prove themselves wrong? I hope we see an Army win against Air Force, because I think that would be really cool to see the Commander-in-Chief trophy be up for grabs during the Army-Navy game. I think that was what would make it fun. A little more extra on there. Obviously, Army-Navy game already has all the juice you need. It's the only game of the week. It's one of the most exciting games that even college football, if you're not a college football fan, you show up to watch. So if you can add one extra piece to it, the Commander-in-Chief trophy, I think that would be pretty neat by far. However, not sure if that is going to be the case. Air Force probably takes care of Army pretty easily, and we have a decision factor before we have a decision on the election votes here in the beginning of November. So I think that's unfortunate, but I think that's exactly where we're sitting. All right, Steve, this was a fun episode. This is a wild card episode for sure. Before you guys head out here, please give us a like and comment and subscribe. Give us some questions. Let us know what you want to talk about or some of the thoughts you have. We'll let you know on our Saturday morning show. Throw us some mailbags as well. You can hit us up on our Twitter feed at SlasherSports. You can leave a comment in one of our videos. We'll get it for sure. Or you can send us an email at SlasherSportsU@gmail.com. All of that is in the episode description below. We'll be back here. Well, Steve, you'll join me back here on Friday for 5 for Friday. Looking forward to that. It's going to be a good episode, and obviously our Saturday morning special. But we'll be back here on the feeds tomorrow as I give you some Thursday thoughts, and we continue on with the college football talk. So until then, we'll see you back here tomorrow. Take care.